Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is Monday, June 30th, 2025, and I'm the host of the show, Dr. Cara Santamaria. We are on episode 557 of Talk Nerdy, and the way that we keep making episodes week after week 100% for free is by relying on the support of individuals just like you. If you're interested in pledging your support, all you've got to do is visit patreon.com, that's patreon.com/talknerdy to learn more. Each week, I tend to shout out the top patrons of the week based on the tier to which they subscribed. This week, I'm going to do it a little bit differently, and I'm going to shout out the top patrons based on their actual support amount. So they include Krister Jansen, Anu Bhadavaj, Daniel Lang, David J.E. Smith, Joseph Lamore, Mary Neva, Thomas Sidovich, Chuck Blell, Gabrielle F. Jaramillo, Brian Holden, David Compton, Eric Sole Hogsbo, maybe? I'm not sure, but maybe. Joe Wilkinson, Jonas H., Pasquale Gelati, Ulrika Hagman, and Namita Aneskens. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. You keep this show going. And right now, as I'm awaiting credentialing at my new job, I am podcasting full time. Like this is my job since I got my license, my psychology license, and I'm awaiting going back to the hospital. So you're making it possible for me to keep doing this even against that background. So I'm just really grateful. Thank you for that. All right, let's get into it. So this week I had the opportunity to speak with Dr. Sarah Boon. She's a freelance writer and editor. She is passionate about mountain environments. She has her PhD where she studied glaciology, and she also struggles with bipolar 2 disorder. And so she wrote a book recently, a memoir, a pseudo-memoir called Meltdown, The Making and Breaking of a Field Scientist. We're going to learn all about that right now. So without any further ado, here she is, Dr. Sarah Boon. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to talk about your brand new book, Meltdown. So tell me a little bit, first and foremost, about, what brought you to write this book? Because it really is, I think that the word in the industry now is pseudo memoir or memoir plus. Like you're talking about yourself, you're talking about your experiences in both academia and in the field, but you also talk about, your research. You talk about history. You talk about some things that aren't directly related to you, but that impacted you. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about, I guess maybe first and foremost, we'll get into you and your background, but just what made you say, I think I should write a book?
Well, basically, I had all these experiences from working in the Arctic and working in remote locations. And sometimes I would tell stories about them to my friends or to other people. And everybody would always say, wow, that's so amazing. And it was weird because I just thought it was normal because that's what I did. And so after a couple of episodes of people saying, that's really cool, I thought, well, maybe I have something to say. Maybe I have something to share that other people might be interested in. And that's what sort of piqued my interest in writing a book about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And so let's talk a little bit about those things that you've experienced, those kind of very personal things that felt very normal to you. So let's go way back before you went to, let's say, undergrad or graduate school. Were you always interested in science? Were you always interested in the environment, in the outdoors?
I was not interested in science. My dad was a geologist, and I hated going on family vacations with him because he was always pointing out the geology.
Mm-hmm.
So I was not thinking science. I was actually thinking writing. That was the main thing that I was going to do, was be a writer.
Oh, interesting. And did you, on your path, because you are both a writer and a trained scientist, did you study writing first, or did you start by writing and then find science along the way? Or did you really dive deep into science and then come back around to writing?
I'd say I dove deep into science, but did writing on the side. So a lot of my career trajectory, particularly throughout my PhD, I was doing writing on the side and taking writing courses and doing writing internships. And so my scientific training was kind of happening at the same time as my writing training.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And so you've written for many, many outlets. You were kind of writing, would you say it was mostly like long form essays, or were you mostly doing shorter form articles for, a lot of the publications many of us read, like Science and Nature and different journals?
I've mostly published in creative nonfiction outlets, and a lot of my work
Ah,
is book reviews.
okay. Oh,
And
interesting. So
then,
are you an avid reader?
yes,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And when you say creative nonfiction, do you read all different genres within creative nonfiction, or do you tend to focus more on sort of adventure, environment, earth science, those kinds of things?
I tend to focus more on environment type of things, but I did read Maggie Smith's memoir, You Could Make This Place Beautiful, and that was completely different for me. And I got a lot of insights out of it. And so I think I need to read more diverse memoirs just to see what's out there and how I can express and structure things differently.
Yeah, interesting. And so in reading so much, is that what ultimately sort of gave you, I don't know, the courage or the inspiration to say, I can do this. I can do a full length book.
Well, I think what gave me the courage was, and I know you haven't mentioned this yet because this is at the end of the book. Um, I have a mental illness, bipolar 2, and it means that I have high episodes and low episodes. And when I was in a really high episode, I decided to write a book. And when I'm in a high episode, I feel like I can do anything. And so writing a book was one of those things that I thought I could do anything.
Yeah. So with bipolar too, so I think most of the listeners at this point know this. I'm not sure if you know this, but I'm a licensed psychologist. I just recently finished my postdoc and got my license in clinical psychology. So let's talk a little
Congratulations.
bit. Oh, thank you. Let's talk a little bit about bipolar 2 because bipolar 2 is different from bipolar 1 for some kind of specific reasons. It can take people a long time to get diagnosed. It can be a little bit difficult to tease out what's going on. Some people get misdiagnosed with other things first. How late in life were you diagnosed, and what was your journey to finding out that that's what was going on with you, kind of neurologically and behaviorally?
I was diagnosed in 2014.
Okay.
So that's 11 years ago, and I would have been 37.
So you lived a lot of your life not knowing.
Yes. And originally they classified it as major depression. But then when I went to another psychiatrist, he classified it as bipolar 2 based on my history.
Okay. And so did you change your medication at that point? Were you able to start taking the appropriate treatments to help level out some of those manic episodes? Or do you tend to, treat it behaviorally?
We started on medications. I tried a whole bunch of medications before we settled on a mix that seems to work.
Mhm.
It's not ideal and it causes things like weight gain and cognitive dysfunction and things like that, but it's the best we can do right now.
Yeah, yeah. And so, for those who maybe don't know much about the diagnosis, how comfortable are you sharing what you know about sort of bipolar 2 and how that's different from bipolar 1, or just, generally speaking, what your experience is like with bipolar 2?
My experience is the spoonie experience. If you heard the story about spoons, which are basically units of energy that you have during a day. And so I have a certain number of units of energy, which is less than regular in quotes person. Um, so I have to be really careful in how I use that energy. And writing takes up that energy, exercising takes up that energy, things around the house take up that energy. There are so many things that suck up that energy that I have to be very careful of what I do. So if I go swimming one day, I know that that does me in for most of the day.
And so does this happen regularly, or do you have periods where you have like higher highs and lower lows?
I do have periods where I have high highs and I do everything. And then I do have periods where I have very low lows. And it just seems like nothing is going to make me feel better.
Yeah. And so obviously historically those low lows were what were indicated first, and that's probably why you were diagnosed with depression or major depressive disorder before you received that bipolar diagnosis.
Yeah.
Bipolar versus unipolar, that's where those words come from, right? Is it
Yeah.
only low versus low and high? When you recognize that you sometimes do have these highs, and like you mentioned, you will start to feel, I guess, kind of the energy and the excitement of a project, and you'll be able to dive right in. That told me, or that told you, I can do this, I can write this book. Did you kind of dive in and write a whole book during one single depressive or manic episode, or did you manage to kind of find that energy even after that manic episode quelled a little bit?
Oh no, I definitely did not write it in the course of one manic episode. I got started during that episode, and then as I went down into a low following that episode, I decided to just keep at the writing. I could do about maybe 2 hours a day of writing, and some days I couldn't do any. But I just plugged away at it because I had started during the high, and I felt like it was something that I really wanted to get out there.
And so how long would you say that, I mean, I always ask every author this. I'm obviously especially curious in your case, but how long would you say that it took you? Maybe not the whole process, soup to nuts, because of course, writing a book for publication is wildly different than writing a book on spec. You have to work with editors and you get a lot of feedback. But just the bulk of the writing, how long would you say that it took you to get that done? Okay, yeah,
five
and
years.
that's not
Yeah.
uncommon. I've spoken with many writers on the show, especially scientists who are writing about their own experiences, who are like, "I had to live life, and I had to do the things that ultimately ended up in the book," or, "I'd been really, like, chewing on this for a long time, and I'd write bit by bit." And sometimes it's a different case where you just have these pressures on your mental health, these pressures in your environment that tell you today's not the day and you can come back to this when you're ready to come back to it. I think everybody's journey is really, really different.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And so talk to me about that experience. You sit down, you have a manic episode, you say, I'm ready to write. At that point in your life and your career, maybe we should go back. Where were you? Were you still in academia? Were you still actively working? Had you left academia? Were you writing full time?
I had left academia.
Mhm.
I was writing, I would say, quarter time,
Okay.
um, or even eighth time.
Mhm.
Um, and I was putting most of my energy into putting together a book proposal and writing a sample chapter.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah. So once you decided, that became almost your full-time job.
Well, yeah, I guess I didn't work on it all the time.
Mhm.
Like I wasn't a 9 to 5 or anything. It was my basically my job in the evenings.
And what were you doing during the day?
Sleeping
Mm.
or um, trying to get some exercise.
And was that a pretty common experience for you?
Yes.
Yeah, and that can obviously really impact so many, when we talk about mental illness and we talk about, the diagnostic criteria, which are far from perfect in the
Yeah.
DSM, some of the things that we talk about, because I'll often speak with friends, family members, colleagues who are like, well, I have that, I experience that. And I'm like, yeah, but the main kind of indicator of whether or not something is diagnosable as a mental illness is, does it impact or interfere with your relationships, with your vocation, with your activities of daily living? And
Yeah.
obviously, when you're finding yourself in a situation where you're just sleeping all day and you're having a really hard time, having enough of those spoons to get anything done, that's a massive impact on your quality of life.
Exactly.
And so you still did it though. You sat down, you still wrote that book. And not to mention before that, let's cut back. You went to graduate school, which is not easy, and you worked as a scientist. So let's go back a little bit in time and tell me what you studied in school.
For my PhD, I did glaciology.
Mhm.
And so I was looking at how water moves in and through an Arctic glacier.
Okay.
And That was sort of an extension of my bachelor's degree, which was in geography.
Oh, okay. So you studied geography first, and then
Yeah.
you focused on glaciers specifically. And what kinds of questions were you trying to answer? Like, what was your dissertation research about?
Well, it was basically about how does this water that's on the glacier get into the glacier and out of it again? Because Arctic glaciers are kind of like Lindt chocolates. They have a harder outside and a smoother inside. And so the harder outside is frozen and the smoother inside is around zero. And
Mm,
so it's hard for the glacier to move because it's frozen down to its on its front. And so you get water in it, and that kind of lubricates the bottom of the glacier and it starts to flow forward. But
okay.
a lot of times the water has nowhere to go, so it shoots up against the barrier at the end of the glacier and it creates an artesian fountain on the surface of the ice.
And so what kind of questions were you trying to answer, or what were you trying to solve?
So I was trying to answer, well, what actually happens to water that enters the glacier? I was also trying to answer, are these things, is there a specific type of weather system that causes these events? And how can we describe these events? How can we quantify them so that we understand when they're happening on other glaciers?
Mhm. Yeah, interesting. And as you were going through school, how was your experience with bipolar affecting not just your academic journey, but also like your field work and the important work that you were doing because I think a lot of people don't maybe realize who haven't been to graduate school in the sciences. Yes, there's coursework, sure, like early on, but most of what you're doing is you're trying to collect data. You're trying to creatively come up with interesting ways that you can answer questions. And a lot of that entails being in a lab or being outside for large periods of time. So what was your experience like while you were tackling that PhD and also dealing with, at the time, an undiagnosed mental illness?
Um, I spent a lot of time outside in the summer. So we would go to the Arctic glaciers in the summer and spend 8 weeks up in the Arctic.
Mhm.
So that was sort of the most time that I spent outside. When it wasn't summer and it was school time, September to April,
Mhm.
I was working on analyzing my data, finding ways to answer new questions on the ice, and preparing for my next field season by writing research grants and talking with my supervisor and just those kind of things, taking courses, those kind of things, just trying to get ready for the next field season. So I had 3 field seasons in the Arctic. The last one was 10 weeks instead of 8 weeks. And it was kind of perfect, I would think. For me, anyway, I loved being in the Arctic. I loved the quiet. There were only 4 of us in camp, so we all had to get along. And I just loved being in camp and camping and being outdoors in a place where probably only a dozen people had ever been.
Mhm. And did you find that it was in some ways, I don't know, therapeutic for you? Or did you find that you
Yes,
you hit challenges while you were there as well? Or both?
I had some challenges, particularly with bad knees and stuff like that, but I did find it was lovely for writing. So my first season in the Arctic, I injured my knee and I couldn't walk on the ice surface for the rest of the summer. So we changed my duties so that I would be down at the front of the glacier and I would analyze the chemical samples of my colleagues. And in between doing that, I had lots of time to write and read. So it was almost the best of both worlds. I got to do the field work, but I also got to write and read.
Yeah. And so what told you kind of the story that you wanted to tell in your book? Like, I'd love to kind of move into what you included and why you wanted to tell this story.
I included most of my trajectory through academia, and I wanted to tell this story because not many people know what happens in academia. It's kind of this black box where humans go in, and then humans come out and talk about esoteric things. And so I wanted to share what academia is really like and some of the problems that we encounter in academia.
Right.
And I also wanted to share the process of getting a PhD, um, because that's something not a lot of people do. And maybe a lot of people don't understand it or understand the work that goes into it. So I really wanted to talk about that as well.
And against the background of what you were kind of coping with, which is not, I mean, it's unique, sure, but it's not that unique. Like, there are a lot of individuals in academia going through that process who are dealing with all manner of pressures, whether they're neurological or psychological in nature, whether they're environmental, whether they're dealing with family or loss or mental illness or physical difficulties. it's it's already such a challenging environment, and to have something that you're coping with, very often people, I think, suffer in silence because they feel like they're not allowed to be dealing with anything except for their schoolwork.
Exactly. I think it's not something people talk about at all. And I had read a book by Katie Rose Guest Prile, and it was about mental illness in the academy. And one of the things she talked about is she said mental illness has become normalized, so that if you're a PhD student, for example, and you feel depressed and you feel like you just can't go on, you look around and the other PhD students are like that too. So you just think, oh, this is normal. This is what happens in academia. I'm no different from anybody else. And I think that's consistent with how academia works. You don't talk about these things because they're not relevant, apparently, to the science.
Hmm. Yeah. But we should, shouldn't we?
I think so.
Yeah. And so are you hoping that contributing in this way, writing a publication that's not just that's not an academic publication, it's a trade publication, will kind of um, open up conversations about those things?
I hope so. I mean, I didn't have a ton of problems during my degree. I had one major depressive episode, and my supervisor was very good about it. Um, he dealt with it very professionally.
Good.
Um, I think we need to talk about these things more and just understand that sometimes things aren't all good, and sometimes people need some space or some time off or some time away to kind of deal with things that are going on in their lives.
Yeah. And some programs just don't have that built in. I think some programs are better than others. They allow for leave at certain points, and they allow they give, I think, the students more independence to make decisions that are best for them. And other programs are quite rigid.
Yes,
And would you say that yours was on either end of that spectrum?
I would say it's not necessarily a factor of the program itself, but it's the
Mhm.
factor of being a grad student.
Mm,
Um,
mhm.
being a grad student is, especially at the university I went to, is very competitive. They say, or they told us when we first had our initial meeting of all the grad students, that we were the brightest of the bright who had been selected to be in this graduate program. And so there was a lot of pressure on us already at the beginning of the program. And so I think that it was, there was pressure, but there was still some leeway. So, like, I knew a guy who got ill with a nerve disorder, and he was able to take time off from his PhD and then to work on it from home while he was recuperating. And so there was some flexibility. The key was to ask for it.
Mm.
And that's the hardest part, I think.
Well, yeah, I don't think we're often taught how to do that or empowered to do that very often.
No.
And so much of it seems to have to do with, I don't know, the comfort that you have, let's say, with your advisor and just the comfort you have in navigating the system.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I had a pretty good relationship with my advisor. So when I had a major depressive episode, he was really good. And I moved back to Vancouver Island from Edmonton, and he just said, do what you need to do. And I said, I want to finish my PhD even though I'm not well. And he said, well, I hope you can finish it and we'll stay in touch. And you just do what you need to do to get it done.
I'm curious because I'm recording this from here in the US. I'm in California, which is probably one of our more progressive states, but we're still beholden to our federal sort of healthcare system. I by no means expect you to be or to have any expertise in the inner workings of Canadian versus United States healthcare. So I'm more asking from your perspective, navigating a mental illness in Canada. Do you feel like you've had a lot of support? Do you feel like it's something that's relatively easy to do, or is it quite difficult to navigate that system?
Well, bureaucratically at the university, it was a little difficult to navigate
Mm,
because when I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, I was still a prof
hmm
and I needed to take a medical leave.
hmm
So I had to go to the dean, which is higher up, and tell him I needed a medical leave. And I brought someone with me from the faculty association because I felt like I needed backup and
hmm
somebody who could remember what it was that the dean had said because I was having troubles with memory.
Okay.
So I had to go to the dean. The dean approved my leave. I was on leave for 3 months, and then I was transferred over to an insurance company, and I went on long-term disability, and it was all very well sorted out. I had to take a couple of tests actually, to check my cognitive functioning, and they basically agreed that I needed to be on long-term disability, and that was very straightforward.
hmm
They asked me to apply for federal funding for disability, and which I did, and I got that funding. But it's all been very straightforward and worked out well.
hmm That's good to hear. And so at that point in time, did you step down from the university?
It was kind of weird. My exit from the university was a bit chaotic and fast.
hmm
So I didn't have a lot of time to talk to people about at my university about it. And I was also feeling the stigma of it at the time.
Yeah.
I didn't want to talk to people about it. I didn't want to have to explain what was going on. So my exit from academia was a bit chaotic. I finally left my position. I felt like I left my position a year after I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder. And when I went on health leave, medical leave, that felt like stepping down from my position.
Yeah. 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 And how long was the period of time between when you left and when you said, "I'm gonna write a book"?
6 years.
Okay. And so
Yeah.
in the interim, you were writing for different outlets and sort of piecing together your career, but also not feeling that kind of pressure because you were getting that support from the federal government.
Yeah. So I was doing a little bit of work here and there. I was
Mhm.
spending most of my time testing out different medications and taking long walks with my dogs and things like that. I've never written a lot just because I can't
Mhm.
for different publications, that is. So I just plugged away at the book as I could after I decided that that's what I wanted to do.
And how satisfying was it for you to write the book and to finally finish it?
It was really satisfying, particularly because the last two chapters I talked about being a woman in science at my university, which was not a good experience. And I
Mhm.
also talked about leaving academia because of my mental illness. And I just felt like talking about those two things was very cathartic.
Mhm.
And I felt like it really lifted a weight off my shoulders when I finished those last two chapters.
So tell me a little bit about your experience as a woman at your university.
It was hard because I looked really young. So
Mhm.
I was 30 when I started at University of Lethbridge. And if you looked at me, you would probably guess that I was 20.
Okay.
And so I got a lot of questions at conferences about whose lab I belonged to. And I had to say, well, I have my own lab. And I found it difficult at my university because I was hired at the same time as another faculty member. And he got a lot of perks and extra help and first chance at applying for grants that I didn't get. And a couple of times I was asked not to apply for a grant so that there would be less competition for him.
Hmm.
And then there was also the politics of the department. And they had some serious politics even before I got there. And there was a lot of politics around the position that I took. And so there were things that happened that I didn't really know why they were happening, but it was all based on previous politics around that position.
Mhm.
And so I
Yeah.
just felt like I was told many times that when they hired me, I was the third choice candidate out of three. So I didn't really feel welcomed.
Of course.
I just felt like I was there to fill a space. And because I couldn't apply for some grants at the same time as my colleague, it was detrimental to me because in the year that I did apply, they changed the application process or they cut the amount of funding and then I didn't get the grants.
And so it was just uphill the whole time, like even from day one.
Yeah, and one of the things I talk about in my book is called the glass obstacle course. And it's not a glass ceiling that you have to crack to get into the upper echelons. It's more like episodes that come up every day that you have to kind of jump over.
Mhm.
And that's kind of what I was dealing with was this glass obstacle course.
And how long did you really, like, allow yourself to be in it? Was there a or maybe I should ask, like, what was the way that you coped?
Um, I did more work. I applied for a lot of different grants that I could get. Um, I made sure to get good graduate students that I could supervise. I tried to be the best teacher I could be. I tried not to think about how things were going in my department and how I was being treated.
So do you feel like you were throwing yourself into the work for you and for your students and not for your institution?
Yeah, somewhat. It was kind of an escape hatch because you end up spending so much time writing grants and looking after grad students and teaching, etc., that it can keep you busy and keep you from thinking about what's going on in your department.
Mhm. Yeah.
So that was kind of my escape hatch was to do those things and block out what was going on in the department.
Yeah. And so, telling this story, I think, is an important one, as you mentioned, because you're not alone in this, even though you feel alone in this. There are people all over the world right now who are trying to get through their academic training and who are feeling quite lonely, but who are dealing with a lot of additional pressures. What are you hoping that your book communicates? What are you hoping that people get out of it as they read it?
A couple of things. I hope they get out of it that fieldwork is fun and necessary, and that you're lucky if you can get into a fieldwork based program.
Mm, mhm.
I'd like them to understand what academia is like, what it's about, not just the bad things, but just how it works, whether you're a grad student or a faculty member. And I'd like them to get some sense of mental health issues out of it. And I say that because I can talk about mental health. There will be no backlash for me, but there are other people who can't talk about it. They just have to suffer in silence. And so I feel like for those people, I'd like them to be able to read it and say, okay, here's somebody who validates my experience. I can't necessarily mention it to people I work with, but at least I know there's something out there that can support me.
Yeah. And you actually dedicate towards the end of your book, you do dedicate quite a bit of space to, the experience of being a woman in science. So I'd love if you could share. I mean, you did talk a little bit about your experience at your university, but maybe you could share a little more about some of your insights about gender in the sciences right now and the where we are, how far we've come, but definitely how much farther we have to go.
It's different for everyone. I had written a series for Canadian Science Publishing's blog, and it was a series of interviews with Canadian women in science, and just finding out from them what their life in science was like, where they were at now, and what they would advise younger women coming through the system to do or not do. And a lot of the women talked about things like, in one case, a forestry researcher, she said women weren't supposed to drive trucks. So they took trucks into the field, but women weren't supposed to drive them. Silly things like that. I know there's things where academics have meetings and then they ask the woman in the room if she'll take notes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's so common. Ugh.
Yeah. Or if she'll get coffee.
Yeah.
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 And there's also a dearth of women at higher levels in the university. So since I've been at the University of Lethbridge, in the meantime, they've actually increased the number of women at higher levels. But I would say in general, most universities have very few women at levels of dean or vice president of research or those kind of positions.
Yeah, it's so interesting that, like, although if you were to look at the statistics across the board, there are more women than men earning graduate degrees in many science fields. There are more women than men engaging in creative and interesting science, yet at the very tippy top, it's still highly dominated by men. Like, the
Yeah,
people who are making the decisions are, overwhelmingly male.
yeah. And we also have this program in Canada, the Canada Research Chair Program. And it basically nominates people at different universities for a tier one or tier two Canada Research Chair.
Okay.
And for the longest time, and people did analysis on this, for the longest time, it was mostly men who got those positions. And then they added a program called the Canada Excellence Research Grant, and that was meant to bring people worldwide to Canada to kind of kickstart our research field.
Mhm.
But most of those people were men as well. And so it's not just at the upper levels of university, but it's in these more prestigious positions that women are not being considered for at the same rate as men.
Yeah, it's, infuriating.
It is. And I read a book by Virginia Valian called Why So Slow? And she talks about how it's going to take 100 years or so for women to be considered equal to men because of issues in society and how society views women in general.
Mhm.
It's a really good book. I'd recommend it.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for that. That's incredible. I mean, it's an ongoing issue. I'd say that we probably talk about it almost every week, in some form or another on the
Yeah.
show. But I'm always really excited to, get other folks' perspectives because, like you said, we're not a monolith. It's not just like this is woman's experience is this. It's
Yes.
100% different for different people. It depends on where you live. It depends on, who you're working with. It depends on your institution and so many other things. I'm curious if there's anything that we haven't discussed yet, Sarah, that you were really hoping that we would talk about or that you'd feel, like remiss if we didn't get to for the listeners.
Well, there's a couple of things.
Okay.
One is that I do know women who have been well supported by their universities and have moved into upper positions and things have gone well for them. So by
Yeah.
no means is it always a bad thing to be a woman in science.
Right.
And the other thing I wanted to talk about is that I think sometimes people think if you're on long term disability, you have all the time in the world to do what you want to do. But the reason I'm on long-term disability is because I can't do what I want to do.
Right.
And so I'm managing my spoons, my energy. And if I decide to work on my book, that means I'm not doing other things because I've used up my energy. So it's not this great time off of not doing anything. It's dealing with an illness and trying to manage life around it.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, that you're right. There is, and I think for different reasons, mostly rhetoric that has a firm agenda behind it. But there is this kind of propaganda that individuals who require disability are doing it for some sort of nefarious purpose, or that when they do get disability, it's like, oh, you've got all the time in the world, so why
Yeah.
aren't you much more, productive or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important point, definitely. Anything else that comes up for you that you wanna make sure that, that the listeners know about?
Um, well, I am working on my second book.
Oh, good. Okay, tell me a little more, or what you're allowed to tell us at least.
It's going to be about mental health in the outdoors,
Okay.
and basically, does the outdoors help our mental health, or are there other ways in which we can help our mental health that are outdoors adjacent?
Mhm. Oh, that's interesting. So are you sort of pulling from your experience? Are you sort of looking to the literature and what we know about the connection?
A bit of both.
Okay.
Yeah. So this will be a more researched book than my first one,
Mhm.
and it'll be structured in essays.
Okay.
So different than my first book. Some key themes will reappear, but definitely different structure and a lot of different content.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. Well, I wish you so much luck as you venture into that new project, which I'm sure. Well, I can't be sure, but I can assume or I can imagine might feel quite daunting. But you did
Yes.
it once, so now you have all of that sort of experience and all of that know-how to help you do it again. But I wish you the best of luck, and I'm really grateful for you spending your time, for you sharing with us your experience today, but also for you taking the time to sit down and write your book. Everybody, the title is Meltdown: The Making and Breaking of a Field Scientist by Dr. Sarah Boon. Sarah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kara. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And everybody listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.